Um, Now, when we look at what's going on with the Earth's climate, my general point of view is that the Earth climate is controlled by its orbit, and there is scientific research to cover this. You're the scientist. Would you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, everybody thinks that the atmosphere and the CO2 is the control, and that occurs because the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change deliberately focused only on human causes of climate change. Therefore, that's anything within the Earth's atmosphere, particularly CO2. In fact, there are climate is a function of many things going on, and as I always used to tell my students, everything from cosmic radiation from deep space to heat coming off the bottom of the oceans geothermally, and everything in between affects the climate. And because they wanted to blame humans for climate change, they deliberately narrowed the frames of reference, and by they I mean the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and they gave the scientists the definition of climate change as only human caused climate change. Therefore, that's why you end up with the focus on CO2. And you eliminate the sun, you eliminate what you're asking me about, and that is all of the other physical changes, things that cause change in climate. The major one, everybody knows the sun has heat and light, that's radiation, and you can have small variations of that cause temperature and precipitation change. And notice, by the way, this is another example of how deliberately directed this is. All the focus is on temperature, and all the focus is on warming. The reality is cooling is a much greater threat to the Earth than warming, but nobody even talks about that. And then the other thing is they don't even talk about precipitation. And yet, for most of human needs, and certainly plants and animals, with the precipitation is a much, much more important thing. When I worked with farmers, and all what they wanted to know, they didn't care from year to year what the temperature was. It had minor effect on their production. But you changed the rainfall from year to year, boy, and you had a huge impact on them. So these are all examples of the political focus upon temperature and particularly upon global warming. And that, of course, leads to focus on solar radiation, the heat and light coming from the sun. Um, if you if you vary that heat and light coming from the sun to the earth by 6%, you can do if you do that in a computer model, that will explain all temperature change in the history of the earth, which of course is about 14 degrees Celsius total change from the warm interglacial periods to the cold glacial periods. And so a 6% change in the heat and light from the sun. But that heat and light from the sun varies only fractionally, not even 1%. And so it cannot be used to explain the temperature variability. When you start looking at a longer term, the second most important cause of climate change are changes in the physical relationship between the Earth and the Sun. So those things include the orbit of the Earth around the Sun, the tilt of the Earth, and then the date on which equinox occurs. That is the date on which the days and the nights are the same length of time. Okay, now that changes over time, and most people don't know that. Most people don't know, and those effects, by the way, the three that I've listed, orbital change, tilt, and equinox, are collectively called the Milankovitch effect. They're named after a Yugoslavian scientist by the name of Milutin Milankovitch, and this guy, the amount of work that he did, and of course it's pre-computer age, he calculated the variance in the amount of energy that reached the Earth from the sun because of the orbital change and the tilt change and the equinox change. It took him 40 years to do it, and he calculated it every year for 600,000 years. And of course, what he ended up with was a net temperature graph, which explained most of the changes in the temperature record, including the ice ages and the periodic buildup of ice sheets and so on. Of course, since Milankovitch, we've been able to put this into the computer and able to extend that right back through time. So that, of course, that's the beauty of the computer, the volume of data and the ability to manipulate that data with different forms. And of course, we now know that on a long-term and medium-term basis, the major cause of climate change are the tilt and the orbit of the Earth around the sun.